All right, I'm going to go ahead and call this work session to order on the utilities budgets. Let's start with the introduction starting on this side. Felix Rivera, John Rattleton,
Forrest Dunbar,
Peterson, Lance Wilbur, Management and Budget. Mark Spafford, SWS.
Heidi Thomerson, SWS.
All right, so we are here to finish up our utilities. So Lance, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we just have a couple utilities to finish, and we're going to talk about solid waste and municipal light power. You should have copies of the handouts. They're the same as the material that we gave you on the 25th, so if you have your notes in that one and you want to follow along, or if you didn't bring it, there you go. Again, I'm just going to walk through each of the utilities. So in your packet, the page numbers skip a little bit. It's because you don't have these sheets in yours. Well, I have divider sheets in my presentation. So if you go from 7 to 9, it's because you don't have the divider sheet. So you're not missing a page. It's just from the presentation purposes. So SWS, as the Assembly is aware, they have two different utilities, kind of like AWU and like ML&P. They have disposal and refuge, and we'll talk about disposal first. So when you look at their disposal on their operating side, there's really no significant changes that are going on here except for the landfill closure accrual. There's a smaller number there, and I think that is in part due to the calculations adjustments that we've done as part of 2020. And I just want to bring that piece out. The other part is the $301,872. That is an adjustment as a result of an AM that was passed earlier this year to decrease the amount of MUSA that would be coming from the utility. The other numbers, I don't think there's any significant changes, but as we move along in solid waste, I want to point out this. If you go down and you look at the positions, and you see that you have 73 full-time, 7 part-time, and 6 temporary, that equals 86 when we go into the other ones. So the total position count inside SWS is 113 personnel. 86 of them are in disposal, and the balance of them are in refuse. And so just so that you can tie the numbers up, I just wanted you to bring that to your attention. So going on to the 8-year summary, if you look, I think a couple things I want to point out here. When you look at their net income is is positive, and it's right around that $2 million number. So that's a good sign. As I mentioned, when you look at the budgeted positions, the first number is the 86 positions. Those are the ones that are in disposal. The 27 are the ones that are in refuse. So when you get to refuse, you're going to see 27. You won't see the 86, but that's just why that's how it's illustrated here. I just want to point that out. Solid waste, similar to this year, they're providing a dividend. So for the disposal side of the house, it's about a $750,000 dividend. For solid waste and the other utilities, we always verify and check this in 1Q, but just to let you know that the port, the solid waste, and AWW water side are providing the dividends to the municipality this year, so we appreciate that. And then I think the only other thing I want to mention on this page is the Assembly is aware of the rate increases that are proposed. So when we prepared the budget in October, we had the rate increases for the disposal side at 6.25%, and then we had a 5% at the refuse side, so we're reflecting them here. As that gets solidified and if there's any refinements to the numbers, we will adjust those, but right now we just included those in the budget on the revenue side.
Mr. Whittleton.
So I guess the question, you have this net plant. I suppose that's the buildings and stuff or something. So where does it show up? Are we going to do these big projects and build a whole central transfer station? That should be a big number somewhere. Does that show up anywhere? And then why does, net plant goes up a lot. Is that what, can you define that?
So I think the jump is the $40 million between 21 and 22. That's part of the central transfer station development. And then it goes up another 5 and then another
So
7.
that's reflected there?
I believe so, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Moving on to the statement of revenues and expenses. I think the only thing I wanted to point out here was probably the change in the interest from the cash flow. So I'm looking at non-operating revenue, the second block of figures there, the second line down, interest from the cash pool. The numbers that we had in their 19 pro forma was about 200,000. In revised, it's 400. So the adjustments are going up, but we get those interest from the cash pool from public finance, and but that's a significant change. And then the last one I wanted to point out on this page is the non-operating expense, the very bottom. You see an interest during construction. It's about a 400% adjustment. You see that on the bottom? And that's basically interest that's going to be out of their operating budget for one capital investment, one big capital investment. So that's the change. That's why the big change there. It comes out of their operating budget for the interest on the capital project. So other than that, there's really no significant changes in their revenues and expenses, unless you guys have some questions at this time.
Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so we're going to be selling revenue bonds then to pay for that and paying them back out of their operating budget?
I think and plus that's also part of why the rate increases that we include.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Mr. Dunbar?
So, forgive me, I'm forgetting the term for marking for Lance. The very large facility that burns all our trash for power. What do you call it again?
Mass burn incinerator,
Mass burn
waste to
incinerator.
energy plant.
So I assume it's too early in the sort of thought process to start reflecting it up here. But I am curious about, we have this landfill closure reserve with tens of millions of dollars in it. My understanding is if we were to build that facility, we essentially wouldn't need a landfill closure reserve anymore, or it could be much, much smaller because it would push out when we close the reserve a century or
Right.
2 centuries. I
Right.
mean, so how does that play out? I mean,
We're going to talk about that on Friday, but the way that I see it playing out, and Heidi can correct me if I'm wrong, but basically, you're going from a closure of say like 2060 to like 2200, and so that obviously dramatically changes the calculation of how much money you're going to need and how much money you're going to have to put into the landfill closure fund in order to fund, the long-term care of it. And so basically what I would see like best case scenario is that we're able to draw, assuming the assembly approves that, from that fund to help offset the capital cost that's associated with the project like that.
because in this projection, it has the landfill closure reserve increasing dramatically up to $93 million in 2025. But I assume that is based on this investment account you were talking about. But also, the assumption that if you actually go forward with the plans you're talking about, that reserve would drop instead of increasing so dramatically.
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you. Before we get to you, Mr. Weldon, I just wanted to be clear. So some of us were looking at our calendars. What's supposed to be on Friday?
Oh, that's another conversation with public finance. That's
Got
separate
it.
from this. Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Mr. Weldon.
Not with y'all.
Well, continuing on that, so I'm just trying to understand these numbers. So we have, I think the page before this, you have a future landfill closure liability. And it,
So you're looking at under the net income on the very
Yes.
bottom. It says future landfill closure liability.
right, so, the 1,600, then you have, what is that supposed to mean?
Good idea. I don't know.
If I may, through the chair. The 1602 was the amount that was added to the closure fund in 2018. We did not make a contribution to the closure fund in 2019 due to a change in the way we were calculating the amount of time that we can take to make a contribution from every year contributing to taking 5 years to catch it up, just in case the investment account that we now have actually turns enough of a profit to cover the amount we owe. So when we did the calculation at the close of 2018, we made a determination of the amount we thought we would have to add, divided it by 5, and per the new ordinance, we now contribute 1/5 of that in 2020. So we have 1/5 going in 2020, and you'll see that we anticipate that that fund will continue to grow the way it has in 2019. Therefore, we didn't anticipate making any more additions in 2021, 2022. I'm thinking that that fund will catch up, and at the close of 2019 show that we have contributed enough. Does that sort of make sense?
Well, maybe. So then we hit the landfill closure cash reserve, and that jumped, I guess, $1 million between 19 and 20, and then, are you reading this right? Then 20 million 2021, then 10 million a year. It's a lot of money. Where's that come from?
It's now in an investment fund, invested in with an advisor, helped us invest it, and so it is growing in markets, in stock markets, that kind of thing, as opposed to just a savings account. So it's a much larger growth anticipated. We have a consultant that helped determine what we think the growth will be over time.
And he thinks 10 million a year?
With the amount we have in there, yes.
How much is in there without this?
It's like right at 35 million right now.
You have 35 million in there, and you expect it to be making 10 million per year off of that?
Well, we're going to be adding $500,000 plus it will grow, yes.
3%.
It might.
That's a pretty good return. I don't trust it.
We'll check with public
We'll
finance
check.
as well.
We'll check with public finance.
Yep.
And that's a 30%.
I want in on that.
Yeah,
by
me
the
too.
way.
It does sound like it's kind of big.
Right.
Yeah, we'll double check with him on the future of those and see if that percentage might be overstated.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson, do you have a question?
I guess even if we do proceed down the waste energy system, I would imagine we need to keep a reserve in the fund for closure, just because you never know when something is going to happen that's really bad, and we just have to be prepared. When you look at Brownfield, that doesn't have such a fund and continues to be a problem every year. We have to be prepared. So it's wise to keep that stuff, even for the long term.
Thank you. All right, I don't see any other questions.
Thank you. So let's go on to the disposal on the capital side. The two big projects here that you'll see are work out at ARL at the Cell 9 construction, Anchorage Regional Landfill. For Mr. Dyson, who's not here, but for his benefit. And then the Central Transfer Station investment at about a little more than $3 million. And they have some other smaller projects on their equity side for a total capital program of about $20 million for 2020. And if you have questions about any particular project, obviously when they do a buy, they have to come through the assembly on the equipment as well. Okay. Moving on to refuse. Again, you don't have this page, but you do have this page. On the on the refuse side, again, there's 26 full-time, 1 part-time, so that's where we get to the 27. And that's the other portion of their business. And other than that, there's really no other changes or highlights that I wanted to point out here, unless you guys have questions here. We'll talk about the dividend. From the refuse side, we had $750 from disposal and $300 from refuse. So moving on to the 8-year summary. Similar to their net income on the refuse, on the disposal side, the refuse side continues to be positive, and then you'll see the 27 positions here for we don't have them both. We don't show the refuse, the disposal side, just the refuse side on the slide here. I will point out, because one thing I want to check into, and I have to figure out exactly, and I caught this after we submitted it to you, but when you look at the debt to equity ratio calculations, they do not equal 100. And I need to, so if you caught that, I caught that, and I will find out how that is coming. It may be a way in which it's being calculated. I don't know the numbers are wrong. It's just the way in which the calculation may have been done. And so anyway, that is something that we will do a response. We will tell you how that happened. But they may be right. I just didn't get a chance to get the right answer for you today. So that's the one thing I wanted to point out on this page in case you caught that as well. The rate increases, this is the 5% on the refuge side, which we had projected would be part of the solid waste budget, so we included that as a revenue stream inside. So other than those two things, there's nothing on the 8-year summary that sort of highlights attention unless you guys have some questions.
Mr. Weddleton?
I think it might be your first slide on this. So interest during construction, that's not for the transfer station. I mean, you want to, the refuse is totally separate from that. Well, I thought so.
Well, no, they're actually going to have, when you look at their capital program, you're going to have an investment both from the refuse side and the collections on the transfer station.
Okay. So what component would relate to the refuse? Oh, because you have offices, maybe?
There's offices, there's going to be, warm storage buildings that are there. There's a maintenance facility that's there. Of course, we have our collections disposes of material on the transfer station tipping floor, as well. So there's a split, I think, between the two utilities of 60-40 disposal collections, respectively, as far as the splitting of the capital cost is concerned.
So this gets refuse at 40%.
Yes.
Okay. Back to the 8-year summary. We talked about this page. Moving on to revenues and expenses. I think the one thing I would highlight here is under the operating expenses, where it says transfers of use of dividends and gross receipts, the percent change shows 1.39. The calculation is not correct. It's, I think, closer to 80. But I will, I caught that when, actually I didn't catch it, someone else caught it, pointed to my attention. So I think I know what the challenge is. The numbers are correct, it's just the percentage is different. The percentage number is not correct, but the dollar numbers are. So I just wanted to make that point to you in case you are looking at it as close as I am. So other than that, the numbers are all good. It's just that we'll verify the percentages. Okay. On the capital side for the refuse, this is, as Member Weddleton noted, and we just talked about, you'll see that the transfer station is split between disposal and refuse, and on their capital program for their debt part is all into the new transfer station off 58th, and then other investments on the capital program on equipment and other supplies. Okay. So unless you have anything for or for solid waste, we'll get back to you on those two issues in a response and get just to verify how we got there.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to ML&P. Thank you, Heidi. Thank you, Mark. Molly, this seat's all warm. Got it all tuned up for you. All right, we're on slide 14. I'm not going to leave one of those squeegees. I'll share my own Molly.
Oh, yeah.
No.
Yeah.
One of my ear.
All right. So ML&P, we have electric and gas, and we're going to start with electric. And I think as you compare last year and this year, one of the significant changes is and it's mostly a cleanup from 2019 to 20, is the interest expenses. It was, I think in 2019, it was like $600,000, and we just had some cleanup that we did, and that's why the number is primarily so big. But other than the other expenses, other than that piece of cleanup, the numbers are pretty consistent. On their positions, the same number of positions, the 283 positions that they have, they show as the same number in both gas, or in all of ML&P. They're not divided like SWS. So the same position count that they've had in the past is moving on to 2020. All right, going into the 8-year summary, there is nothing on this page in the 8-year summary that caught my eye that's significantly different than what we've had in the past. And again, we're treating ML&P like it's going to be with us through all of 2020. There's no part of the ML&P budget or the general government budget that includes any of our proceeds on where those would be expensed. And obviously, when the sale is complete, we're going to have to make some significant changes in our budget for 1Q for here. So I mentioned that before. I'm just mentioning it again.
Mr. Dunbar?
Mr. Chair, what is causing the large drop in projected revenue between 2020 and 2021?
Which slide are you looking at, Mr. Dunbar? I'm sorry. 15, okay.
Very top goes from 179 to 155.
So I believe, go ahead.
Through the chair. It's a transfer price of gas has gone down, which therefore is the cost of power adjustment. It's not the actual rates. It's our gas is cheaper.
Okay. But it appears as less revenue. Oh, you mean so you're selling it at a cheaper price, or?
Well, yes, we're selling it to
I see. The
ourselves
expenses are
at a
going
cheaper
to-
price. Therefore, our customers are charged less, so their total bill goes down.
So there's this simultaneous drop in expenses, so it's not,
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
ordinarily that kind of drop in revenue would cause us to fall deep into the red, but you're saying it's not the case.
It's offset by the expenses because it's the cost of the gas we use for generation.
And that gas is almost entirely from the BRU. And why, I mean, that's pretty far out, it's 2021. What makes you confident that the price of gas is going to fall so much in 2021, or is it something to do with what we have control over?
Well, it has to do partly with the way that we calculate that.
Okay.
Previously, we received a rate of when we had debt associated with the gas fund. I think we've probably discussed this before, that our debt associated with the gas fund is gone. We no longer have debt, so we are not able to, earn, a rate on that. So our revenues in the gas fund are really essentially the production costs, which is less than when we had debt service.
Interesting. All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton?
Oh, I think I got that. That's interesting. Then. So the price, it's not like you have an arm's length transaction that you value it at. It's actually, the debt's paid off, so RCA will only let you recoup a certain amount. That goes into the COPA.
Yeah, and the other thing too is, that when our rates are based on our plant, so we are earning, as an investor-owned utility, the investor being the city, we earn a rate of return on our plant assets. However, the gas fund is contributed by our customers, most of it. Very little of it is non-contributed, so therefore we're earning very little of a rate of return on the gas now that we no longer have debt associated with it. So the cost to our customers is less.
So our bills will go down. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I don't know totally, you'd have to add it up, but that portion of the bill goes down.
You had a follow-up on that, Mr. Dunbar?
Yeah, so let's say that the sale does go through and BRU goes with it. And I know this is part of our stipulation. There was a large and complicated section on the BRU. But are they subject to the exact same rules, or do they have any advantages over us? You might be the wrong person to ask this
I
to.
probably am the wrong person to ask.
Okay. I'm curious if perhaps this is more valuable to them for one reason or another, which is a good thing. But you know, they for example, they're able to borrow at different rates than we're able to borrow because they're a nonprofit entity versus us being the city. And you know, that was when we were selling MLMP, that was one of the justifications was they can get a different kind of financing than we can. I remember the very beginning of the discussion. And those little differences in the margins make a huge difference when you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. I'm wondering if there's some way that you guys can exploit this in a good way that we can't. But, anyway.
But still, the benefit is supposed to go to the MLP legacy
Right.
customers.
So that was one of the parts of the stipulation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I might be jumping the gun here a little bit, but I thought I had seen somewhere where our operator is planning to drill some more wells. And so maybe that's not correct, but I thought I'd seen that somewhere. And so if they're going to drill wells and production increases, would that bring the price of gas down a little bit or not?
Well, actually, our production has gone down because we lost a well last year, and
Really?
you know, and so they're planning on drilling some wells. We have it. The way that affects us, honestly, is how much gas we have to buy. Because if our production goes down below what we need, then we are actually have to purchase, and that's who we have to purchase from, is Hillcorn.
Yeah.
So kind of, you know, our operator, we have to purchase gas from them. So drilling wells, that's good news, because what we want is a higher production out of the field
Right.
now, and so that will help.
Okay.
The difference would be that if the production is less than we projected, we would have to purchase more gas from them, which is more expensive.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So we're on slide 16, which is MLP electric revenues and expenses. I think on the revenue side, this may be getting to the thing that Molly just mentioned and Mr. Assemblymember Weddleton mentioned. When you look at the commercial, on the revenue side, the commercial, that may be just the gas production going down from 109 to 101. Is that correct? This change?
It's based on revenue, on projections, load projections too, and I'm not the expert on what that is. I don't have it on top of my head, but there is somewhat. It's essentially flat.
Okay. Other than that piece, unless the assembly members have some questions about some of these other line items, the changes, there aren't any significant changes. The other interest expense I mentioned earlier, where we modified from 600,000 to a larger number. You'll see under non-operating expenses an increase of about 800%. It's just because of the jump between the 600,000 to the proposed 5.8 million, and that is the cleanup that we did from 19 to 20. Okay. On the gas operating side, this is also related to the gas production expense. You'll see the change in the revenue and the expense. There's the expense side going down. And again, all of the positions are shown in electric, so there's no position shown on the gas side that will be operating. And when you look at revenues and expenses, I think the thing that I wanted to point out here, again, was the gas production expense, that we have changes, and that's under operating expenses, non-labor gas production expense, and you'll see the changes there. And unless MLP or the Assembly have any questions about what's going on in the revenue expenses.
Do you have one question? Mr. Weddleton?
Actually, backing up, sorry to the
Nope.
electric. So in the revenue, you have sales for resale went up. expecting it to go up.
Which page are you on, Mr. Wilson? I'm sorry.
Oh, 16. So 75% increase in sales for resale. So that's wholesale sales of our electricity. So that surprises me because we got so many new power plants, and I thought we were getting that was shrinking.
We primarily, our biggest customer is Golden Valley Electric for sales for resale, and they're dependent, they produce power, but they use a coal plant, and they were having problems for a few years with their coal plant, and we sold a lot to them. And but we also aren't the only people selling. MEA can sell, Chugach can sell, MEA can buy, Chugach can buy, and it's all based on what to each individual entity is what the best price. Golden Valley oftentimes they can buy it cheaper than they can produce it. So these are projections related to, but it's mainly related to Golden Valley and what's happening with them.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
If I might.
Yeah.
Golden Valley, they're experiencing, the only area really experiencing growth right now. So they have had some challenges related to too much pollution in their air and some production problems. But that's where the feds are investing $2 billion right now in housing. So they're definitely starting to expand. Thank you.
Okay, I think we were on page 18. And I mentioned the gas production expense, so I don't, unless you have any questions on this page. Okay, let's go to MLMP Capital. Obviously they're not building another plant 2A, so they're still investing inside the capital program, inside the utility. And these, unless you have questions on particular projects, there's really not a surprise. I mean, the categories look pretty much the same. The amounts are slightly different than they were last year. So, if you have questions on them, just let us know. Okay.
Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you. Just a general question on, we have meters up there, and we've been approving a lot of contracts for purchasing meters lately. So is that number for actually additional ones that are going to be purchased next year, or are the ones that we have actually approved going to come out of next year's budget? How?
No, I think those.
Is that new?
I don't think they might be a combination of actual new or replacements to upgrade the meters. But we can find out.
I was just in terms of contracts that we've already approved. Will these be new contracts coming through? So this really is truly a 2020 expense, or is?
Yes, it's a 2020 expense.
Thanks.
Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is a question for you, Lance, and maybe to a lesser extent, Mr. Falsey. On here, there's a capital expense. I guess that's, I don't think the same. Oh yeah, okay. A capital expense for the equipment power plant. And so let's say the sale does go through. Next year, this presentation, we probably won't even have an MO pre-presentation. Or if we do, it'll be dramatically different. But for the forever, we're planning on owning the equipment power plant. Have we thought about what that's going to look like? Are we going to have sort of a presentation just on the sort of rump MLMP entity with the equipment power plant, or is it going to be folded into something else?
So we have thought about that. I don't know how it's going to be presented right now. I think it will be a separate presentation and not folded into something else. But I honestly don't have a complete answer for you right now. But we are trying to figure out how we will present that.
Okay.
I do not know right now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. Again, Assembly members and those in the audience, the budgets are online. I appreciate the extra time today. I'm sorry that we didn't get through it last week. I've made some notes next year so that I can adjust my time a little bit. And, I'll put Mr. Halpro at the end. I can tell you that right now. So we'll act accordingly. But again, if you guys have any questions, you should have received the responses from the 18th. I'm just waiting for one more set from our department for the 25th from Becky on the number of contracts. As soon as I get that, I'll get those to you, and then we'll get their responses to these two that we had today. And I'll get them to Desiree as soon as I possibly can. Again, if you guys have any questions, please let us know, and look forward to seeing you, let's see, next Tuesday, and then the 19th, and then the 15th for your amendments.
Yep. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.